This may be surprising. The difference between how so many people, pundits, and posters to social media thought Election Day would unfold and how it actually did. Despite predictions of potential calamity, the day passed by calmly at the vast majority of polling places. Election Day was, I think, a moment of quiet majesty across the length and breadth of this infinitely complex land. Tens of millions of Americans cast their votes and had their say. This institution of democracy worked, and worked well. I'm Richard Davies, and in this episode, 3 pairs of braver angels, blues and reds, who sat together on Election Day 2024.
In elections, people will win and lose, but we as Americans are left with kind of moving forward together. We have to learn to win and lose with grace and understand how to be more empathetic with people that did, whose side didn't win. And then what do we do next? Do we brag? Do we gloat? Do we go gotcha? Do we take this as another gotcha moment? Or do we try to be, a real solution to how people are feeling and really step outside of our tribe and go, what's it like for them?
Our show is about fixes.
Yeah, how to make the world a better place.
How do we fix it?
How do we fix it?
Some wore red hats, others wore blue. Across the country, pairs of Democrats and Republicans sat together as part of the Braver Angels Election Day initiative. You'll hear from 3 pairs in this podcast, and what you're going to listen to from all of them is quite a contrast to the election coverage that we were all exposed to in recent months. These liberals and conservative citizens' experience of the day was uplifting. Let's check in with our first pair. Don Goldberg is a blue, Elizabeth Dahl is a red, and they spent several hours together in Renton, Washington, outside the King County election headquarters. How did the day start for them?
Well, I picked up Elizabeth at the ferry, and we waited in a long line. There were a lot of people that were waiting for the last minute to vote here in our county. And we sat there with 60 lollipops, half were cherry and half were grape, red and blue. And what did we say? I said, she's red, I'm blue.
We get along, and so can you.
And so can you, yeah.
Yeah, people were really warm about it. They seemed sometimes surprised, sometimes amused, but everyone was really receptive.
It was really kind of delightful.
Yeah, it was fun.
In many parts of the country, Election Day has changed. A lot of us did early voting.
When I was younger, we would go to either people's houses or local schools, and you felt a real sense of civic duty or civic pride meeting your neighbors and scribbling your thing on a ballot and closing the curtain and everything. It's different when there's mail-in and absentee voting, but to see that many people, as Elizabeth had mentioned, lining up, queuing up, registering at the last minute, it was just nice to see.
Washington is a vote-by-mail state.
You live in your bubble, but growing up, I lived in a particularly Jewish neighborhood, and it was in the 1950s, so it was Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, which is it's probably more Democratic now, but less than it was 4 years ago. That was a close-knit community. It wasn't so much like I'm meeting the folks in my neighborhood, but I'm getting a better idea of the folks in the larger community.
It's kind of funny to me, actually. I've grown up in Washington, and I'm fairly young, so I have actually never experienced an in-person vote. I've never experienced an in-person poll. And the more that I hear people who are older than me talk about the community experience of gathering together on election day to vote and being able to talk with your neighbors. And I actually met someone who told me that his neighborhood used to do cookies and lemonade after they voted at their local precinct. And it's kind of persuading me that I would love to return to at least partial in-person voting. I would be fine with moving away from full absentee if it resulted in some greater community cohesion. I think that could be really fun.
Things have become sanitized, in all kinds of ways. Maybe for the sake of being more efficient, there's a certain soul that's kind of missing when things are official and sanitized.
Don Goldberg and Elizabeth Dahl. Let's go to our second pair next and get their feelings about Election Day. Liberal Dorsey Cartwright and conservative Roger Haynes are members of Braver Angels in Texas. They sat together outside a polling place in Austin. Dorsey and Roger had met online a bunch of times, but not in person, not until that day.
It was really fun. One great moment was actually meeting Dorsey face to face, because as we talked about in the first episode, we were at a Braver Angels Central Texas Alliance meeting, and Dorsey brought up this initiative, and I was like, whoa, I want to do this. So it was cool meeting your partner from the other side face to face. It was really fun for me. It also took me back to my old recruiting days for the military. You get out there, you set up your table, and you get to work. And I was really excited, obviously, a little bit nervous, right, on people's reactions. But I think I was hopeful, and I felt like we were where we needed to be.
Dorsey?
People are walking by, and we'd say, "Are you familiar with Braver Angels?" And they'd say no. And I'd say, "Well, he's red, and obviously with the red hat on, and I'm blue hat on. And yet here we are. We voted different ways, but here we are working together to hold our country together, to show that we can keep working together no matter who wins." And Richard, people were responsive to that.
Wow. The reaction was pretty good.
The reaction was good. They were saying, yeah, we do. We need to keep working together. It's gotten too divided.
What were a few memorable moments from your time together?
One that really keeps coming back in my consciousness was really one of the first people that we talked to. It was the young couple. They had voted, they were coming back out, and they were holding hands, and there was just such a glow to the two of them. So much that even little introvert scaredy cat here, I got out of my chair and and reached out to them to ask them about Braver Angels. And they were so thrilled to hear about it. And it turned out that they've started an urban farm not far. And they said, we'd love to hold Braver Angels events at our farm. He's a musician. And he said, in music, he said, we musicians, we have a real mixture of conservative and liberal. He said, we learn how to get along. He said, and this is so good.
I think we had a spectrum of opinions and, beliefs or ideologies, which really resonates with me that there's still a lot of work to be done.
Roger Haynes with Dorsey Cartwright. Our third red-blue pair are Martin Hunke and Tarleton Ferrin in Tucson, Arizona. Martin leans left politically. He came to the U.S. from Germany just over 30 years ago. Tarleton is a conservative who grew up in rural Arizona before moving to Tucson as an adult. They spent about 2.5 hours sitting together.
Yeah, so we met up together at a polling station. Martin brought the sign and I brought the water.
Their sign said, "Vote red, vote blue. We're all Americans through and through."
But yeah, we were able to interact with a couple people, and definitely the line could see us and had some interactions there.
Martin says there were a lot of political signs for various candidates nearby and plenty of voters lined up. But despite the expected tension over Election Day in this swing state,
it was very quiet, very peaceful, no loud voices, nobody yelling. There was maybe like a pickup truck that went by honking at some point, but that's about it. And I was really happy to see that people would just peacefully give their vote and then leave. But since we didn't want to antagonize anybody, Tarleton and I talked about it, we did not proactively call over to people. We didn't want to feel that we didn't want to contribute to the distress that some people, I'm sure, experienced on that day already. So we just passively held up the sign, and some people came over. It was something like, vote red or blue, it doesn't matter, we are all Americans through and through, something like that. And so some people came over. I think even the city council person came over and said nice sign and started a conversation with us. So I trust that lots of people have seen the sign, and maybe that worked a little bit in their minds as they passed us. But I'm certainly glad I did this with Tarleton. We had a good 2.5 hours to talk to each other, and I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, likewise, we were able to discuss more, kind of continuing on our one-to-one conversation we had earlier, and to some extent. It was fun. With the few interactions that we did have, we had a guy say amen, and a lady driving by nodding her head at the sign. People that did talk to us said, hey, this is cool, and thanks for doing this kind of thing. So
there was not a single negative reaction to us. Everybody who did talk to us was I guess kind of glad to see something like this.
So the experience of these Election Day peers was mostly positive. Everyone we spoke to said they were glad they'd taken part in the Election Day initiative. After the results, a very different set of reactions, as you might expect. Let's hear from liberal Martin Hunke first, and then Tarleton Ferrin.
I felt some sadness. Here are my fellow citizens, and here we are all wanting to do what's best for our country, deciding how we should live together as a society, and yet we know nothing about each other. These are all strangers to me. And I realized that we live in very different worlds. We can't agree on what truth is. We have different sources for our personal truths. I'm a little bit deflated right now, not so hopeful that we will find a solution going forward.
Kind of to Martin's point, all these important things that we do as a society, we often do kind of by ourselves, in solitude. It can be a lot to bear. I mean, there's big political questions, they're complex things. None of us are really smart enough to figure it all out by ourselves, and yet where's that community that we can work through? It's definitely not built into our neighborhoods the way that it may have been 150 years ago. That's one thing I appreciate about Braver Angels is it tries to build that community in a way that we at least can. And, maybe not give everyone the answers that they need, but at least give us a space to connect with each other. If we can find a way to build kind of more authentic community, that will help us in the long run.
Martin says we all need stories that we can share with each other beyond our small bubbles. Stories that come from people we don't know as well as from those we do.
Because we, as human beings, we live off stories. And if we don't listen to each other's stories, we lose the connection. Storytelling is so important. And the most important thing is how people are affected by the decisions that are made by the election. And I think very often in our bubbles that we have now, we see only one side of a story. There's almost no interest to show the full picture. And I wish we would come back to that. Tell the stories, how we are affected by this. And then with compassion and empathy for each other, look for a solution that works for all of us.
Martin Hunke in Tucson, Arizona. Coming next, more reactions to the vote and where we are now as a nation at this time of deep polarization. This is How Do We Fix It? I'm Richard Davies, and we're reporting on the work, people, and ideas of Braver Angels, a national group of citizens who are pushing back against toxic polarization one conversation at a time, reclaiming connections with our neighbors, many of whom think differently about the world than we do. You can learn more about how Braver Angels are making a difference at braverangels.org. Now more from our red-blue Election Day pairs, talking about their feelings, about politics and the results. Don Goldberg leans liberal. He lives in Seattle.
Before the results, I really believed in democracy. From what I saw with my own eyes and what I heard in the experience. But then again, an authoritarian is the one, at least at the top of the ticket, that got elected. So I'm not sure now.
Elizabeth Dahl is a conservative.
Before the election, I believed in our democratic republic and the institutional norms, strength to preserve the union. And after the election, I still do. I'm going to repeat something that one of our colleagues at Braver Angels, Casey Jorgensen, said on a meeting last week, which is that she felt like she lost the election a long time ago. And I think that's true for me as well. I did not vote in the presidential race because I am a conservative and I don't see Trump as conservative. And I also definitely couldn't get on board with the progressivism of Kamala Harris. So that pretty much left me politically homeless without anywhere to go on the presidential race. And so for me, it was very fascinating and entertaining, probably more entertaining than any election I've ever watched, to feel like I didn't have a preference at all. And I was just sort of sitting back. I could see pros and cons regardless of who was going to get elected. And I was just sort of feeling the whole experience and observing it and being interested in how it was shaking out in different places and watching everything roll in. It felt much more like I was an external observer than an active participant than it has in the past.
Conservative Elizabeth Dahl, who lives on very liberal Bainbridge Island outside Seattle. Let's close this episode with conservative Roger Haynes, who voted for Donald Trump, and the woman who sat alongside him on Election Day, Dorsey Cartwright, who went for Kamala Harris. They've become friends as Braver Angels volunteers, and that's made a real difference to Dorsey, especially in the days after the results came in.
I'll tell you, Richard, it's a remarkable thing because obviously I'm the blue, and so this was not a happy day for blues. And yet what I'm noticing so much is how different I am feeling inside from 2016 when, Trump had won. I was in the deepest despair with a profound underlying sense of doom. And I remember going and sitting on the couch in our living room and getting very quiet. And the question came to me of what can I, little Dorsey Cartwright, one person, do to help my country? And then the Democrat in me came out and said, I'm going to put everything I have into turning all the houses blue. And then I thought, yeah. And then the Republicans are out for 4 years. They're just getting more angry. And then they're going to take over. And it's just yanking back and forth. And then it came to me, we've got to, both sides have to somehow be helped to really communicate with one another. And by that, I don't just mean hearing words. I mean really getting what the other one's world is like.
And then this time after Trump had won again, how was that different?
I felt this calmness. And what I realized is that I do not trust Trump at all. And I don't trust a lot of people around him. However, Roger does trust Trump. And I trust Roger. So I'm going to hold Roger's feet to the fire. And if anything begins to happen that I think is not good, I'm going to go to Roger and say, hey, help me understand this. How do you see this? And so what I've learned, Richard, is that the person that needed to begin to learn to enter the other world is me. And Braver Angels is really facilitating that.
How do you see it, Roger?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? Sorry. That was really moving what Dorsey was talking about. I was kind of captivated and stuck there. It was great.
Your side won, and yet Dorsey is a friend, and you know that there are many people hurting or feeling despair or anger.
Sure.
How do you see things?
We do need to have more empathy and show our humility to everybody. In elections, people will win and lose, but we as Americans are left with kind of moving forward together. We have to learn to win and lose with grace and understand how to be more empathetic with people that did, whose side didn't win. And then what do we do next? Do we brag? Do we gloat? Do we go gotcha? Do we take this as another gotcha moment? Or do we try to be, a real solution to how people are feeling and really step outside of our tribe and go, what's it like for them? People are scared, heartbroken, and that should bother people in the red side, that people are scared, because that translates to me that people could be scared of me. If I had my long beard, I could see why, but it breaks my heart that people feel that way. And I think we need to feel the heart of the other. We have to show our heart to others, right? We can't keep it inside. And that's super important if we really want to heal our country. And it's a bottom-up approach, as our leaders in Braver Angels have said. It's up to us as citizens to build a house united. Stewardship for us so much more important than relying on somebody else to fix it. And I asked the question, how do we fix it? We get to work.
We the people, we get to work.
Thank you for answering this show's question. How do we fix it? Dorsey Cartwright, Roger Haynes, thanks very much for joining us.
You bet. Thank you, Richard, for doing this.
Thanks, Richard.
Roger Haynes with Dorsey Cartwright in Austin, Texas. Thanks so much to our friends at A Braver Way, the podcast hosted by Monica Guzman. Their production team of David Albright and Jessica Jones helped us hugely in putting this show together. If you like what you're listening to on our podcasts, also take a listen to A Braver Way. They're sharing some thoughtful, common sense ways to help us all cope with the uncommon divide that we find ourselves in. Most Americans want a better kind of politics. Join us on our journey towards that goal. I'm Richard Davies. Miranda Schaefer is our excellent producer and sound designer. And thanks for listening.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.